This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. I'm at thetruthcentral.com, and today is Monday. It's July 10th, 2023. The first article we want to cover has a lot to do with the end of the dollar. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a group of countries that are organized around China. They made a decision that they are going to do international trade in the national currencies of these countries rather than the American dollar. Now, this is a very important announcement because since the end of World War II, we had before the war ended, we had an agreement at Bretton Woods up in Washington State internationally that the dollar would be used to settle all international trade. In other words, if you buy something in Europe, and it goes into to dollars. So someone from Canada wants to buy something in Europe. Canada gets dollars for their Canadian dollar, US dollars. Dollars go to the Europe, and then in Europe, those dollars are changed into euro. It's very inefficient compared to modern technology, which allows almost the instantaneous transfer of money, especially if you use a currency like XRP, which is really a cryptocurrency, but it's a form of international trade that allows you to bypass going into a currency. You just trade in XRP, which are digital units. At any rate, this is a major move because you're getting the de-dollarization, which is a move against the United States, seeing that our dollar is becoming increasingly weak, largely because of the massive amount of government spending, the fact that we have a fiat currency, which means it's not backed by gold or anything else, just the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. And countries are beginning to question whether or not we're going to be in a default. We may pay the interest on this debt, but we're paying it with new money that we create through Treasury debt, and then the Federal Reserve is buying that debt. It's like a Ponzi scheme. In other words, countries are feeling like they're not really getting their debt paid. This debt's never being paid. It's just being flipped over with new made-up money. So if these Shanghai Cooperation countries, which begin moving away from the dollar, it's going to set off a whole domino effect, which is the likelihood that it's going to happen increasingly in other parts of the world. Now, this is the beginning of a move which is going to essentially bring down the United States dollar from its key position. And let's just try to find the countries in this Shanghai Cooperation League. And let me see, they're going. I'll get that in just 1 second here. The member states, there's a lot of them. It's China, India, Kazakhstan, Russia, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. Afghanistan wants to become a member. So does Iran and Mongolia. And this is a group of countries that essentially is this group of countries on Russia's southern border, Kazakhstan, etc., Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, plus China, Russia, India. It's very similar to the BRICS nations, and it's a very large group. Now, the BRICS nations, this is the second story I want to cover today, which is that the BRICS nations also are moving in essentially the same direction, because Russia announced on Friday that the BRICS nations are going to develop their own gold-backed currency. Now, what this means is that, again, it's a weakening of the dollar. People are saying that the dollar is not going to be trustworthy in the future. It's the beginning of a worldwide concern that the dollar is a Ponzi scheme, that it could technically default, that the payment you're getting on your interests for all those holding U.S. Treasury debt or agency debt could be paid off in currency that's worth a lot less than when you bought that debt. So in other words, the debt you're holding from the U.S. government has to be discounted in terms of the increasingly worthlessness of the U.S. dollar. Now, the BRICS nation, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they're going to be meeting here in August, and they're already having pre-summit discussions. The summit is going to be in Johannesburg, South Africa. And on the table is a number of countries joining. They'll probably take in 5 or 6 new countries, maybe more. But if the BRICS go to a common currency that is gold-backed, it's going to be a major challenge. These BRICS nations already represent a large percentage of the world's population. Russia, China, India alone, plus Brazil and South Africa, they bring in some of the OPEC nations like Saudi Arabia. Iran is also wanting to join this group. You're going to have a very anti-American coalition forming in both the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS nations. And it's going to be a direct challenge to the dollar like we have not seen perhaps ever. And it's not going to be particularly favorable. I want to cover one more story, then I'm going to have asked Chris to comment. But the next story, I think, is also falling in line with what I've just reported, in that the Dutch government at the end of last week failed. It collapsed. Why? Because the Dutch government is woke government, and it has proclaimed policies, for instance, allowing this immigration, which is now flooded with Muslim countries, people from Africa, people from the Middle East, fleeing and trying to get into Europe, which the Dutch have openly received them. And we're seeing in France that there's not a cultural integration of these people. You're having riots in France, which again makes France unsafe. But in the Dutch countries, what you're seeing is also a combination of the anti-farm movement, because these woke people are saying that farming produces carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide for the fertilizer, and all the other concerns they have. They want to end farming. They want to reduce the number of private farms, which again is suicidal. So these measures of just opening the borders, letting in a group of people who are not going to culturally integrate with the Dutch population, going to want to, in fact, be completely opposite. And the antipathy between the culture of these people coming into Europe from the Middle East and Africa is so dramatically different that you've got a clash from the traditional Dutch culture to adapt to people who just don't really even respect Dutch laws. In France, you've got the same thing. Some of these areas, you're not allowed to talk about this. It's not politically correct to talk about no-go zones in France, where the French police don't even enter because the Muslims have Sharia law. They're all basically ruling themselves, and they do not respect the French authorities. So here, the government just collapsed because finally the Dutch population is realizing enough is enough. Now, I think what you're seeing is a group of anti-American nations, which increasingly is pushing together an alliance that is Russia, China, India, and Iran is going to join this group. So you're going to have a very aggressively anti-American group with a stronger currency. While this woke insanity has weakened the West and has largely been a detriment to the United States, the policies we've implemented are policies that are designed to make us economically less strong. The Federal Reserve is intentionally pushing us into a recession and will increase interest rates probably twice more this year, with disastrous consequences for the economy. We're headed into a massive recession. And I'm continuing to warn people about this. And it's why I've published this new book, which we're going to do a lot more to publicize over the next few weeks. And the book I've written with Dean Heskin, who is the CEO, I'll try to get a balance here so you can see a little better, which is the coming global crash, how it's going to create an historic gold rush. And you're going to begin seeing this happening. Okay, that book is just out now. It's up on Amazon. And take a look at it. If you really want to understand what's going on and the dimensions of it and follow it, this book explains it. It's a short book. It's one of my more direct books that gives you the facts and allows you to follow it. Why I'm emphasizing it is because when we had these crises before, gold in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was president and getting out of the Jimmy Carter disaster, gold went from $35 an ounce in 1971 when President Nixon took us off the gold standard to $843 an ounce, 1980 when Ronald Reagan was president. Then we had the 2008-2009 subprime real estate crisis, and I'm going to say we're going back into a repeat of that. And gold then went in 2010 to $1,426 an ounce. We had the COVID lockdown. Gold went to a high on March 8th, 2022 of $2,074.60. Gold will probably double again in value with what we're going through. Chris, any comments?
I was doing some math while you were discussing that Netherlands situation. I was thinking here, if these people, these wokies, are so worried about carbon dioxide in the air, I think I can figure this one out where we can keep our farms. With all the concentrated illegal immigration and screaming and rioting and all this, producing a lot of extra carbon dioxide, we can avoid that by cleaning up the immigration policies. That's number one. But I really believe that the wokies, if they really want to help us out, is for at least 1 hour every day, hold their breath. This way they can keep in the carbon dioxide, you see, that they're so worried about producing, and we can keep the farms. We can keep our dairy. We can actually have real meat and not let Bill Gates create 3D printed meat. There we go.
Well, I mean, you're hitting on an important idea that this woke is essentially anti-human.
Right.
It's neo-Marxism, which this is.
Well, they're anti-other humans. That's the whole thing. They're not anti themselves. They want to make here it is. The woke want to make the world a better place for them to live in.
Well, essentially, though, it is almost suicidal because they themselves are not exempt from the class that they want to. They exhale carbon dioxide. Woke carbon dioxide exhaling is just the same as non-woke exhaling carbon dioxide. Now, yes, they may want to get rid of the people they don't agree with. We'll come to that in a minute. But the point is that it is fundamentally anti-human. It's fundamentally a negating idea. Neo-Marxism, which starts out against capitalism and determines to be depopulist in its nature, thinks there's too many people. We need to eliminate people because we're using too much of the earth's resources. Now that means get rid of everybody else. I'll have more. It's fundamentally a pathological idea because you cannot increase wealth by redistributing wealth, taking away from people. You can't increase production on the earth by going to a less aggressive or available and cheap form of energy, namely solar, wind, and battery. So they know that this is going to be destructive, and their goal is to destroy. It's part of the cultural revolution that we're going through. It's Maoism, to destroy the cultures, get rid of God, get rid of marriage, attack the babies, allow abortion, have transgenderism and gender identity confusion. All these are negative ideas. And we are weakening ourselves intentionally by allowing these policies to go forward. Now, the next story I want to cover here, which is this, I began to focus this weekend on the number of articles that are being published saying that the First Amendment is essentially it's a psychological disorder. So
there's irony for you.
Yeah, and so I came out. What this article was published by a guy named Nirmal Kandal, who is a Indian. He from India, publishing in the Journal of Nepal Medical Association. He's saying essentially that many of us unknowingly suffer from an information disorder syndrome. So this form number one is a milder form in which the individual shares false information without the intent of harming others. Grade 2 is a moderate form in which the individual develops and shares false information with the intent of making money and political gain, but not with the goal of harming people. And grade 3 is the severe form, which the individual develops and shares false information with the intent of harming others. The management of this disorder requires the management of false information, which is rumor surveillance, targeted messaging, and community engagement. And so sufferers from grade 2 and 3 need psychosocial counseling and sometimes require strong regulations and enforcement to control such information disorder. Okay, now if you want to define that the First Amendment, free speech, is psychologically a disorder. In other words, it's like a mental illness. This is really extreme. First of all, what gives these woke the right to determine that the information is false? In other words, let's take this article attacks, for instance, the anti-vaxxers during COVID-19, saying that essentially the anti-vaxxers were preventing people from getting the vaccine, which meant that more people were going to get the virus and die because the anti-vaxxers weren't protected from the disease. Now, if it turns out that the vaccinations were themselves harmful, the anti-vaxxers may have been the ones with the truth. And the problem is these are not evident ideas. I've written an article on this. I'm going to get it published this week, but I'm publishing things in the American Thinker. Take a look at the American Thinker. And I'm also going to be publishing some things on the Gateway Pundit. But the point here is that I went to a Supreme Court case, which is one of my favorites. It was a case by Justice Brandeis, who wrote a concurring opinion in a case called Whitney versus California. This was involving 1920, a woman who joined a Communist Labor Party in California, which was intending to have insurrection. It was the International Workers of the World, which was a communist labor union, was behind this organization, and they were revolutionaries. They espoused revolution. So what Justice Brandeis said was that essentially that you can't prohibit speech you don't like, and if you're going to actually have what they call prior restraint or prior punishment, I wrote my dissertation on this at Harvard, prior punishment, prior restraint, and political dissent, which has to do with whether or not you can silence someone because their speech might be dangerous. Justice Brandeis had to say it's got to be an imminent, really serious danger. You can't just prohibit someone from saying something you don't like because it might be what you consider dangerous. That the real test here our founding fathers had was the allowing these ideas to combat each other, be determined by reason and facts. Well, the left today is not interested in facts. They're interested in narratives, and they define ideas which oppose theirs as being inherently detrimental. This comes from Herbert Marcuse, who in the 1960s wrote a book called, an essay called Repressive Tolerance. And he was arguing that you've got to take these ideas which are not supporting a neo-Marxist vision of the future where we reimagine a world with no police. We reimagine a world, like John Lennon said, without God. You know, we don't believe in sky fairies, so God doesn't exist. Well, and if you believe in God, that's a mental illness. This is a way to march into totalitarianism. and free speech is fundamental. Truth is why I'm on the campaign of thetruthcentral.com. And my books are all, increasingly being written. The truth about energy, global warming, and climate change, which continues to do extremely well. And it'll be followed up right there by the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, which is in print. It's in the press right now. It will be in print later this year. And these are, and there'll be a third. This is a trilogy, the Great Awakening trilogy, because I think these ideas are so dangerous and so detrimental. The United States of America is committing economic suicide, and it is not necessary. Chris, do you want to comment?
You want to go back to this Dr. Nirmal, Dr. Nirmal Kandal. I found his bio. Okay, he's knee deep in all of this. Part of his bio reads like this: I am working with World Health Organization's World Health Emergency Program since 2015 in WHO headquarters, Geneva, as the head of evidence and analytics for health security. So basically, he's been a propagandist for the pandemic movements that the World Health Organization pushed forward anyway. And of course, now that the World Health Organization is going to have control of climate, I slipped on that one, but health emergencies, which soon might be climate emergencies, this does not bode well for people who have evidence to the contrary of the national now world narrative.
I would put that link to that in the chat. I wanted to take a look at that resume. I'll probably add it to the article before I submit it for publication. Thank you.
You have it.
Let's talk about these next two articles. I'm following very closely the developing recession. It's starting. I see signs of it right now. One article, the Epoch Times reported the corporate bankruptcies have reached the highest level since 2010. So a growing number of U.S. firms are collapsing under the weight of higher interest rates as corporate bankruptcies reach their highest first half levels, first half of the year since 2010. The first 6 months of 2023, there were 340 corporate bankruptcies, topping every other comparable span in 13 years. This is according to S&P Global Market Intelligence. That's up 93% from the same time a year ago and higher than in 2020, when there was a spike during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are 54 recorded corporate bankruptcy filings in June, the same number as in May. Last month, some of the most notable companies to file were Lordstown Motors, Rockport Company, Instant Brands, Acquisition Holdings, and iMedia Brands. Lordstown Motors filed for bankruptcy June 27th with plans to restructure its business and seek a buyer. According to a company release, the electric vehicle manufacturer's assets include its endurance pickup truck and related resources, S&P noted in a July 6th report. That's not a good indication for those who are advocating electric vehicles. And this whole bankruptcy wave, companies including Bed Bath & Beyond, I mean, I'm wondering if Budweiser's headed to the same direction. You're finding that the American consumer is reacting against corporations which are on this woke agenda. Americans are waking up and will continue to wake up as these bankruptcies escalate. They're going to escalate. Now, the next article, and I'm following the economic news, which is just not very good right now at all. The monthly mortgage payments have reached record highs in the United States. Monthly mortgage payments are up. Now, why is that? It's because, again, the interest rates are increasing and are very high, so that you see that would-be home buyers are facing higher mortgage payments, even as the prices of homes are beginning to decline. because, again, the demand is weakening and people can't get into the market given the higher monthly mortgage payments with higher interest rates. The median monthly payment listed on applications for home purchases, home purchase loans jumped 14.1% in May. That's a huge increase from a year earlier to an all-time high of $2,165, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. That's the monthly payment, the median at the middle, $2,165. That's a big price for a middle-class family to pay. The May figure also represents a 2.5 increase from April. So what the Mortgage Banking Association is saying is that home buyer affordability eroded further in May as prospective buyers continue to grapple with high interest rates and low housing inventory. The size of the mortgage and the interest rate on the loan influence how large the monthly payment on a 30-year fixed mortgage will be. These two housing market variables have ballooned in recent years. Okay, now as the price, the monthly cost of a mortgage increases, it pushes people out of the home buying market. At the same time, this new rule is going into place where those with excellent credit scores over, like, say, 650 are going to pay a premium. You're going to have a fee like of 1 or 1.4%. It's a big fee. Could be like $100 a month on a median mortgage payment extra in order to subsidize those with low credit ratings, those below 650. Again, this is another socialist idea, which is identical to what we did in 2008, 2009, where we created a subprime mortgage market where people who really didn't qualify to get home loans were allowed to get home loans. And when interest rates increased, they couldn't make the mortgage payments on any adjustable rate mortgages or any of these mortgages that were contrived to make it easy for the low-income home buyers to get into the market. You had a crash in the subprime market. Now, what's happening is we're setting up for both commercial real estate and for home buyers through, if interest rates continue to rise, which they're going to do, you're going to find this is a bubble. And by this time next year, we're going to be talking about how many foreclosures there are, people simply walking away from their mortgages because they can't meet the mortgage. They're going to default on the houses because they have no other alternative, or they're going to seek buyers who can simply come in and pick up their mortgages. Essentially, they will lose all of their equity in the house if that kind of a deal is made. Now, this is a collapse of a market. And when the commercial real estate, because of the vacancy and the downtowns are becoming unsafe, saw a video this weekend, was fairly frightening, of someone on a scooter in New York who was just driving through, New York and shooting, killing randomly people on the street. Just had a gun and was going by, saw somebody, shot them and killed them. This kind of violence is out of control. And the New York Police Department is having massive numbers of people just quitting. They don't want to be New York police officers. And I've talked to some of them. They're not getting the respect they got in the Trump years. The police are being looked at now as a negative, repressive force. I remember going to New York and people would thank police for their service. Today, this woke crowd wants to spit on police because they see them as the repressive force of the evil capitalists who are putting our heel on minorities, not allowing them to get forward in a repressive, sexist, racist society. Now, all these ideas, again, are creating a set of factors which are calculated. There's no alternative but to send us into a massive recession that's already now baked into the system. I don't see any way to recover from it right now. As I track where the cities are going, more cities are going to start looking like San Francisco. with massive vacancies of commercial office buildings that are going to default. Something like $1.5 trillion of these commercial real estate buildings are going to putting, as it were, in a tower, the number of vacant square feet of office building in major cities, and the tower went into the stratosphere for the vacant offices, whereas the ones that were occupied were very small towers in comparison. We're having a complete crash that's imminent of commercial real estate, and now we're going to have the same kind of crash on the housing market. These are bubbles. The Federal Reserve is really only capable of producing bubbles. And with this kind of a Ponzi scheme, anti-American countries are taking advantage of it. I'm also seeing increasingly that there is a realization that Ukraine is running its own con game. It's basically saying that it needs more money for weapons. The weapons dealers are making their fortune, just like during the pandemic, the pharmaceutical companies made their fortunes. And we are, drawing down on our weapons supplies. President Biden was talking about that the counteroffensive in Ukraine is losing because the Ukrainian forces are running out of ammunition. Well, Russia is going to win that war. And I think with the upcoming NATO meeting, it's increasingly looking like NATO is realizing that backing Ukraine is only going to get NATO into a direct war with Russia. Russia has nuclear weapons now in Belarus, and Putin, I believe, would use them if he felt like we were at war with Russia by supplying Ukraine with missiles that could hit 200 or 300 miles in distance, cruise missiles or cluster bombs or weapons which would seriously arm the Ukrainian forces to put Russia at a disadvantage unless Russia escalated the amount of violence. Russia's systematically destroyed Ukraine and has done so in a calculated way. First, it got control of the eastern part of Ukraine, which is pro-Russian, the Donbass and that whole region. Now Russia is threatening Kiev. If Russia takes Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, it will be a game-changing moment in the war. Russia is on the verge of just doing that. And I think we could have the Ukrainian forces with some false flag operations really do some drastic things. The one I'm most concerned about is if Ukraine ever took out this nuclear power plant, you could have a meltdown that would be another Chernobyl. And Ukraine has been the breadbasket of a lot of the world. And right now, the Ukrainians are largely being pushed out of the grain market for maybe a decade. And Russia is not going to re-up the access for Ukraine on the Black Sea to export grain. And this farmland is being destroyed. By the way, if we go back to the whole issue of global warming, the solution is really pretty simple. Plant more trees. Michigan, for instance, used to be very heavily wooded. Throughout the Midwest, if we go back to the primeval forest before 1700, this area was very thoroughly wooded. More trees will absorb carbon dioxide. It's the simplest solution, is just have a massive reforestation process. And by the way, the idea that human beings deforest is not shown again in the data. Many of these ideas from the left are just not borne out in facts. They don't care because they're dealing with narratives. They're dealing with the way they want it to be. John Lennon. Well, how about if we reimagine there was no John Lennon? Let's reimagine that there is God and there is no John Lennon. That might be a better bet. At any rate, planting more trees would largely solve the problem. These climate models don't work. And if you'll just take a time to study some of the climate science, you'll realize how many lies you've been told. So we're covering these themes very intensively because I want to warn you that it's now time to think about getting your IRAs, your 401ks into some gold. That's why one of our great sponsors, which is Swiss America has this Walking Liberty $50 offer. Please take advantage of it. Sign up and start talking to Swiss America. I think you'll find that regardless of where you are economically, putting some of your available money into gold and silver will have long-term payout positively for you. And our other sponsors, please look at them. My Vital C, which I think is a great supplement, is Carbon 60. I've been taking it for 4 years, and at my age, I'm keeping going and probably more active than I've been at any other time in my life. So I solidly recommend our sponsors, and please take a look at them. Chris, any concluding comments before we wrap up today?
I know you talk a lot about John Lennon. I understand that, but I still say the most talented and best Beatle ever was Ringo Starr. He was the man. The man plays difficult drum riffs, and people don't realize how good he is. I like his all-star band, and besides, Yellow Submarine is the best Beatles song ever made. That's where I go.
Well, it's okay. I mean, you know, the Beatles were a great fan of the in the 60s, and they had a huge following and all the rest of it. I myself prefer Mahler and other classical music, and always have.
I'm a Vivaldi guy myself.
Vivaldi's always good. Vivaldi's always good. But
hey, I got 6 A's on my Nismas, so you know.
I consider Vivaldi entry-level classical music. Mahler is graduate level.
Okay.
It takes a while. You can't appreciate Mahler until you get older, I believe.
I've always enjoyed Dvorak, and his New World Symphony is my favorite. But that's because I enjoyed playing them more than anything else. Anything I like playing, I will. You didn't know this. I play low brass instruments. I was a baritone player in high school and through college, and of course later on in life, I've played for marching bands and classical bands. So yeah, I do enjoy. I enjoy playing the music just as much as I enjoy listening to it. But I picked my Vivaldis and my my Mendelssohns and my Dvoraks because I enjoy playing that music.
Well, I could barely maintain a tune if I wanted to. I never could, but I love listening to it. And the proms are coming up in Great Britain, which is this great music festival. And I always get the catalog. I've gone to the proms. I wish I could go this year. I would take 6 weeks or 8 weeks and just go. And every day they have at the Royal Albert Hall another concert. It's a magnificent music festival, and they play great music, a wide range of music that is difficult. And they're doing some. I think they're doing at least 2 Mahler pieces. This full orchestra pieces, Mahler symphonies, which are magnificent. I think they're doing the 1st and the 10th this year at the proms. I'd love to go. At any rate, let's wrap it up. I always say at the end, God always wins. God will win here too. We're going to go through some very, very tough times, and prepare yourselves for maybe the deepest recession in your lifetime, which has begun. It won't be announced for a while, but it has begun. I hesitate to think of some of the prices we may have to pay for allowing this wokeness to get into our society, starting with allowing God to be taken out of our schools by the Supreme Court going back to the 1940s. Spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, we need to get on our knees and ask God's forgiveness for allowing our society to move away from God. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and we are broadcasting on thetruthcentral.com, a podcast every weekday. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. Today is Monday, July 10th, 2023. God bless.